Hi everyone, welcome to this rendering teardown section. My name's Simon and today I'll be reviewing this image for you. So today I guess we'll be talking about a couple of things regarding a little bit of texturing, quite a lot regarding depth of field effects, and the usual HSV filters and checkup. So as you can see here we have like a really interesting image which has kind of in common way of framing the project, which is actually quite good because it really emphasizes the like the height of the building, and it has this sort of really dramatic effect, which is I think quite working. It might be quite interesting to maybe change a little bit the framing to have a little bit more room at in the upper part of the image, just like so we can check it quickly. As you can see, I think it's a little bit better. So that's a quick start. There's something a little bit that I'm going to talk about really quickly is regarding the texturing. I think the main problem I have with the overall texturing here is that the material is not that understandable. As you can see, it sort of looks like concrete, but still I think it's, I don't know, I actually don't really know what's wrong with it, but it's just there's something that is a little bit off with it. Maybe it comes from the color, or maybe it's just the way there's this sort of a cloudy effect that is maybe a little bit overdone. But to me the material is not that legible, so I would maybe fine-tune it a little bit. The main point of focus here is actually the fact that most of the image is out of focus, so that's something we're gonna tackle right now. As you can see, if I zoom in, basically only part of the building is in focus, whereas the rest is out of focus here. This is usually a good way to sort of concentrate the point of view of the viewer on some specific aspects or specific subjects in your image. The thing is, there's something I'm a little bit confused here, because usually when you use a depth of field effect, it's either for like a proper close-up, or say like just to make the background a little bit more blurry. But still, the thing here I think is that the out of focus effect is a little bit too strong, and also there's something a little bit weird with it, which is that, as you can see here, our foreground is blurred as well, or background is blurred, but some part of the image, like this, is blurry as well. I mean, like, the problem here is that it doesn't seem like it's an actual depth of field effect, but more of a Photoshop one, which means, like, the problem I have is that basically it creates a point of focus on this this area here, which to me is not necessarily like the most interesting part of the image, because basically by focusing here you sort of counteract on the rest of the dynamic of the building, which is to go that way. So what I would actually suggest is either to, instead of putting the top of the building out of focus, would be to actually just have maybe the bottom part of it, so that basically this dynamic here stays legible. The other thing is, and I think that's the main problem, is that it's not like a proper depth of field effect. It's more like a tilt shift, which actually tends to create some sort of out of scale impression, which is not really what you're supposed to look for. So yeah, I guess I would just be like much more subtle with it. The next thing I'm gonna talk about is another thing that I think is a little bit confusing in this image is regarding the lighting. So as you can see in our sky here, we have something like the sky is quite overcast or even quite dark here and sort of quite dramatic. What is a little bit disturbing is that you cannot see any shadows on your building here, whereas it's extremely bright. If you put it in black and white, you can see that this facade here receives a lot of light, whereas this one doesn't receive light at all, which is actually a little bit weird as well. So what I'm kind of wondering is that also, since we have such an overcast sky, the problem is the sky doesn't fit with this kind of illumination. So you either have to at least add a little bit of not blue sky necessarily, but still you still need to have some sort of direct light coming up from somewhere and casting some like shadows here, because otherwise you don't really understand where the light comes from. The other thing you can do is to just decrease the overall luminosity. But I think there's just a sort of a mismatch between the sky and the overall lighting. So that's something you have to be careful with. Final thing I'm gonna tackle quickly is the artificial lighting here. You can see that's happening at some of the levels of the tower. It's not bad at all, but it's just there are two things you need to keep in mind when you're doing artificial lighting. The first one is that especially when you're dealing with housing instead of office building, the lights are never going to be the same hue because no one is using exactly the same light bulbs. So basically the temperature of each level should be slightly different. That way you get some sort of variation in your image. And the other thing is that, as you can see, the repartition of the light is extremely homogeneous, as if they were like a light plane stuck to the glazing, basically. Oftentimes you have to use IES files for your lighting, otherwise it's always going to look a little bit too dull or too homogeneous, and this is not something you really want. Like you usually, or at least what you can do instead of using light planes, is to use a couple of spheres with different intensities, so that it sort of lights here and then you have light here, and that way you'll get some subtle variation on the one same level, which is sort of what you're aiming for. To wrap it up, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the HSV. So as you can see in terms of contrast, that's what I said a little bit earlier. There's something kind of wrong in how this whole part here is overexposed compared to the actual sky. So that's something I should be taken care of. Whether it's whether it's just maybe darkening something, or I don't know. It's just a little bit too dark. Too bright, sorry. Anyway, maybe something like this, I don't know, but just need to be taken care of a little bit more subtly. And when we talk about saturation, there's something that needs to be accounted for. Here you can see, basically when you're dealing with artificial lighting, artificial lights are always going to be more saturated than any natural light coming, except from like a blue sky, but here it's overcast or really cloudy, so you cannot see it. So basically in this image, the saturation should be at its highest in the artificially lit part. So I'm really emphasizing the effect here, but basically that's still something you might want to have a look at. So this should be a little bit more accurate. And the final thing we can have a look at is the overall color palette here, which I think it's kind of complicated because we're dealing sorry with many colors here. So I'm actually not like, even though I do like this kind of atmosphere with like quite a bit of darkness and gloomy atmosphere, but still I'm not sure it's the color palette is the most sensible idea here. Maybe having something less overcast, or at least with a little bit of not necessarily blue sky, but at least some direct lighting to get more homogeneous look, because here there's a lot of black actually, which is not really the best color, I may say. But I guess beside that, it's at least a really interesting point of view, and definitely worth working on it. I'm really not keen on this depth of field effect here. Basically, what I would suggest is to, like, if you use a DOF, just really use it when you're doing close-ups. So I guess that's pretty much it for this image. I cannot really do any changes myself because I cannot like undo the blur, but basically I think it's just a matter of how you set it up. Something that you need to keep in mind is that even though it's quite hard to do like a proper blur effect or a depth of field effect in Photoshop, you can still manage to do it when you export your Z-depth pass and use it as a layer mask and as a smart object. So that way you can really fine-tune the amount of blur instead of trying to do it directly in 3ds Max. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. I hope you found some interesting stuff there, and feel free to comment and let me know any thoughts you have. Thank you guys, see you next time.
Tonight,